Welcome to Storytimer at Large. Delores Jean Wells. Delores Jean was born Delores Jean Alquire in September of 1968, September 5th, 1968 to be exact, to John and Margaret Alquire. She married David Wells on June 9th, 1984. The couple welcomed a son in 1985. In 1987, Delores Wells was a mom and homemaker caring for her 2-year-old boy, David Lee. It should have been a joyful time in her life. On January 26, 1987, all that changed. She was walking home from a relative's house in Terre, Haute when she was kidnapped. Delores was abducted on January 26, 1987 by Bill Benefiel. He grabbed her and took her to one of his 3 run-down homes on 13.5th Street in North Terre Haute. She would not be alone there in her captivity. Bill Benefiel had abducted teenager Alicia Elmore on October 10, 1986. She had been walking to a corner store to buy her mother a soda. Her mother had been sick and thought the soft drink might help her feel better, might help settle her stomach. Alicia Elmore had been there in captivity for several months now, and had endured horrific sexual, psychological, and physical abuse. But she saved her life by convincing Benefiel that she loved him. It was a brilliant survival tactic. She had been through the unimaginable. She never knew what to expect next. Benefiel would assault her and beat her one day, and the next he would be elated about something he had managed to steal. Alicia said some days he would just sit in the other room crying. Benefiel took her to Vincennes once for medical care. That's about an hour away from Terre Haute. She didn't speak up while she was receiving medical care. He was in the room the whole time behind the curtain, and he had a gun. He stayed very close by. He threatened to kill her if she spoke up, and Alicia was so terrified that she did not say a word to the medical staff. Trauma is a very powerful thing. Alicia was a survivor, though. She kept going, even when she realized that she was pregnant. Her will to live and to survive is admirable and a wonderful thing. Good for her. Astonishingly, Bill Benefiel had a wife and 3 children living next door to the house in which he kept the women. He regularly beat his wife, too. She lived in fear of him. The 2 lived largely separate lives in 1987, and yet she felt strangely loyal to him. I think quite a bit of the situation was she had children, and she did not have a lot of skills and resources herself, and didn't really have the means to leave him and start on her own with the kids, or felt she didn't have this anyway. Benefiel's homes on 13.5th Street were ramshackle places and were full of stolen goods. He regularly burglarized homes, driving his blue van, and then hoarded the things that he took. He dug tunnels and holes to hide things in. I don't even know if he legally owned the houses or if they were abandoned and he had just sort of taken them over at some point just because no one was around to prevent it. Both of the homes all of the homes looked like they should have been condemned in the 1987 photos. I have found on Google Street View, it seems that they have all been demolished since then. Benefiel's wife knew about the first kidnapped girl in December of 1986. She told her sister, and her sister called the police and told them in mid-January that Benefiel was holding a woman captive. Nothing happened. The police did not rush over and check on the tip. Um, when Alicia Elmore disappeared, uh, there wasn't a lot of media attention paid to this. I found no newspaper articles about the missing girl. I don't know if her friends and family put up flyers, but there was no media attention paid whatsoever to this girl who was missing. That's kind of the way it is with a lot of towns. If you're poor and you disappear, people just assumed that you were a runaway, and they didn't pay much attention to it, which is very sad. Who was Bill Benefiel? He was born in 1956 and had some birth defects, according to his mother, and a low IQ. Children at school teased him and beat him up. His mother, Helen Benefiel, regularly said he was born with half a brain. Most schools did not have a special education program back in the day. That kind of came along a bit later. Um, Bill had a very rough upbringing and had anger issues. In 1971, at the age of 15, he was almost committed to a children's home in Lebanon, Indiana, but the judge inexplicably never signed the papers. His regular school believed then that he was in Lebanon, Indiana, at the children's home. The children's home in Lebanon had no idea that he should be with them because they haven't received official signed papers. And so Bill Benefiel just never went to school after that. The judge and the court never followed up on it. Social workers believed he was in Lebanon as well. Benefiel had slipped through the cracks of an overburdened and underfunded social service system. Bill's father was not around. He wasn't in the picture. He would later learn that his mother was not his biological mother. She gave no explanation as to how Bill Benefiel had come into her care. If you search old newspaper archives for reports of Alicia Elmore's disappearance in 1986, you won't find anything. As I said before, there was nothing mentioned when she disappeared, when she was missing. The attitude by the media in Terre Haute seems to have been that she had just run away. Another missing teenager wasn't going to sell papers. I don't know if there was a local effort to put posters up and spread the word that way. I imagine that her family was quite desperate. She had disappeared, as we said, while walking to a nearby store. She had taken nothing with her. It was clear to anybody with eyes that she had not run away. But without a big media response, even if someone had seen this girl in the window of that home, they probably would have not thought about a missing girl and made the connection. Benefiel raped the two women repeatedly. Alicia Elmore began counting the rapes when she was first kidnapped. She stopped counting after 64. In her first months of captivity, Benefiel kept her tied to a bed with her eyes taped shut, headphones on, and a gag to prevent her from making noise. He did not bring her food or water very often, and at first did not allow her access to a toilet. When he decided to take the tape off her eyes, it was Benefiel who had to pry her eyelids open. When Delores was first kidnapped, she was kept in the basement. Alicia knew that it was cold there and convinced Benefiel to bring Delores Jean Wells upstairs. He did keep the women separated. He didn't keep them in the same room. Delores was tied up in the kitchen. On February 7th, Benefiel came back to the house with dirt and mud on his clothes. He had blisters on his hands and told Alicia that he had been digging a grave big enough for two. Alicia Elmore was convinced that both she and Delores Wells would be killed that day. Instead, only Delores Wells was killed by Bill Benefiel on February 7, 1987. He forced a very strong glue into her nostrils and glued them shut. He then wrapped her head in adhesive tape. She died an incredibly torturous death of asphyxiation. Alicia Elmore was rescued from Benefiel's house on February 10, 1987. Police were just 3 days late to rescue Delores. If they had listened to the tips called in back in January, they could have rescued Alicia in January and completely prevented the kidnapping and murder of Delores Jean Wells. Delores Wells' body was found on February 22, 1987. Glue residue was still in her nostrils. Tape residue was still on her face and hair. Benefiel had buried her in a shallow grave in a wooded area near the intersection of 25th Street and Spring Hill Road in South Terre Haute. I happen to know a bit of the backstory of this case. In the early 1990s, late 80s, early 90s, I lived in Terre Haute, and I dated a man then who had been friends in high school with Alicia Elmore. Let's call this man Brian. They went to high school together and had briefly dated. After Alicia was kidnapped, police came to Terre Haute South High School to question her friends. They zeroed in on Brian. Brian was not a clean-cut young man. He wore black t-shirts, jeans, and black boots. He had dark hair and dark eyes. He did not look like a nice guy. He actually was a fairly nice guy, but his outward appearance did not reflect that. They held him in an office there at the school and began friendly questions at first. He answered honestly. Soon, though, they began to push him about a scratch on his arm or a bruise here and there. Their questions turned to accusations. Brian, however, was an intelligent and well-read young man, despite looking like a roadie for a heavy metal band. He was also very socially savvy. He knew what the officers were trying to do. He clammed up and demanded a lawyer. He said nothing else, even though they held him there in that room at the school for hours. The police made threats and said that they would personally see him prosecuted for this crime. What crime? Alicia was still missing at that point and was considered a runaway. Brian sat with his arms folded. They took his silence as an aggressive move. They continued to grill him. He continued to remain silent. At the last bell of the day, they let him go. He went straight to a payphone and called the law office of a friend of his mother. I don't know if the lawyer said anything to the police, but the pressure on Brian ended. Brian did say that the police cars seemed to be driving past his house more than usual, but he wasn't questioned again. Keep in mind he was a minor. He was not arrested and was never read his rights. His parents were not present. He was not advised that he could have a lawyer present. All of this questioning was completely out of bounds. A few years later, Brian was working as a short order cook at a restaurant. He was taking a break and talking with another cook there. The man happened to be the widower of Delores Wells. David Wells and Brian spoke about the questioning that both had undergone. Police had put David Wells through the ringer, too, about the disappearance of his wife. Of course, police have to question individuals who were close to the victim, but both agreed that the questioning used was intimidating and threatening. Both men had a moment there of sharing the terror that they felt, thinking that they might just be railroaded into being prosecuted for a crime they didn't commit. I'm writing this not to shame and blame the police. Yes, mistakes were made. Yes, their tactics were wrong. But they really had no idea what kind of predator they were really dealing with in Benefiel. Even with the massive numbers of violent crimes in Indiana in the years before this, it's hard to imagine a predator like this in your town. This was the Terre Haute of Indiana State University, and Larry Bird, after all, who's a very famous basketball player. Police were also dealing with a lot of regular, everyday crimes. Terre Haute was economically depressed in the 1990s when I lived there. All of the problems that come with poverty were there. I learned a lot of streetwise skills that have helped me out a great deal as I traveled the country in the past decades. It's also a college town, Terre Haute is, with a lot of drinking, partying, date rape, drunk driving, fighting associated with the college crowd. There are a lot of lessons we as a society can learn. We can learn a great deal from this case. Many mistakes led to this tragedy. If Bill Benefiel had gotten more professional help as a child, this might not have happened. In 2005, Bill Benefiel was executed by the state of Indiana by lethal injection. I wonder if Benefiel had other victims out there. Were there victims that he did not take home? Were there victims in the home who were disposed of before Alicia Elmore got there in 1986? Delores Wells deserves to be here. She deserved to raise her child. She deserved a long and peaceful life with her husband and family. Rest in peace, Delores Jean Wells.